To speak to a little bit about a particular view I get of Nick for a long time now. But I'll start with the fact that we met in January 2005.
They seemed like a match made in heaven. Nicole Kidman, the graceful Hollywood icon, and Keith Urban, the charming country music superstar. For nearly 20 years, they were the embodiment of a perfect love story. The Oscar-winning actress and the Grammy-winning musician who defied the odds and made two different worlds collide in harmony. But now, the fairy tale is over. Court documents reveal that after 19 years of marriage, Nicole has officially filed for divorce. Those close to her say she fought hard to save their relationship. But sometimes, even love has its limits. When Keith took the stage for his first public performance after the split, fans noticed what wasn't there. No wedding ring, no tender love song for Nicole, and even altered lyrics that hinted at a rewritten past. The golden image of Hollywood's most admired couple had shattered, and for the first time, Nicole's side of the story was beginning to surface. So how did this once-in-a-lifetime romance begin? And what really led to its quiet unraveling? To understand that, we have to go back. Long before the fame, before the red carpets, before Nicole became one of the most celebrated actresses in the world. Nicole Mary Kidman was born in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1967 to Australian parents who were living abroad temporarily. Her father, Anthony Kidman, was a clinical psychologist and biochemist, while her mother, Janelle, worked as a nurse and educator. When Nicole was still a young child, the family returned to Sydney, Australia, where she grew up in a disciplined but loving home filled with ambition and curiosity. As a little girl, Nicole wasn't the confident, camera-ready woman the world would later know. She was shy, painfully shy. When asked to speak in class, her cheeks would flush so red that teachers worried she lacked self-esteem. Yet, behind that quietness was a wild imagination and a deep emotional world that words could barely contain. Acting became her outlet, her way to be heard. Through ballet, drama lessons, and local youth theater, she discovered the one place where she didn't have to hide. By her teenage years, Nicole's talent was unmistakable. She had a rare combination of presence and vulnerability, a screen magnetism that couldn't be taught. The Australian film industry was booming in the 1980s, and Nicole seized the moment. Her breakthrough came in 1983 with BMX Bandits, a vibrant cult thriller that caught Hollywood's attention. With her striking looks and emotional depth, it was clear Nicole Kidman was destined for stardom. But as her career took off, fate had more than just success in store for her. It was during this rise that she met Tom Cruise, her first great love, and her first great heartbreak. They married in 1990, becoming one of the most talked about couples in Hollywood. To the public, they were perfect. Two beautiful stars, madly in love, taking the world together. But behind the scenes, things were far from simple. Tom's deep involvement in Scientology, the controversial religion that played a central role in his life, cast a long and complicated shadow over their marriage. Nicole has always been private about that time, but the emotional toll was undeniable. When the marriage ended in 2001, she didn't just lose a husband, she lost the family she cherished. Their two adopted children, Isabella and Connor, stayed with Tom, leaving Nicole heartbroken and isolated. It was a loss that would quietly shape the woman she became. This wound wasn't just emotional, it was soul-deep. Those close to Nicole say she felt stripped of her very identity as a mother, forced to watch her children drift away from her reach. For a woman who had dreamed of nurturing a close-knit family, the loss carved a scar that would define her for years. So when Keith Urban entered her life, it wasn't just romance she was seeking. It was restoration. She wanted to rebuild the home and love she'd lost, and Keith, in his own broken way, seemed to want the same. Keith, the restless dreamer with a guitar. Keith Lionel Urban's story began far from the Hollywood spotlight, across the Tasman Sea in the quiet town of Whangarei, New Zealand. Born the same year as Nicole, he grew up under the bright Australian sun after his family relocated to Queensland. But even then, there was something untamed about him, a restlessness, a hunger to escape the ordinary. His father, Bob, ran a small convenience store, but had a deep love of country music, a sound that felt foreign in suburban Australia. He placed a guitar in young Keith's hands, unknowingly setting him on a path that would define his entire life. By 6, Keith was already performing. Small audiences, big dreams. Country music became more than just a genre. It became his refuge, a way to process heartbreak and hope even before he fully understood them. But home wasn't always harmonious. Rumors suggest that tension and financial hardship clouded much of his childhood. Those struggles left their imprint, shaping a boy who would spend his life chasing stability he rarely felt. Through his teenage years, Keith became a fixture in local bars and talent shows. He wasn't just honing his music, he was crafting an image, the smoldering country rebel with a rock star's edge. School quickly lost its appeal, and he dropped out to chase the only dream that ever made sense. For Keith, there was never a backup plan, only the stage, the sound, and the escape. But chasing escape came with its own shadows. By his 20s, Keith's journey into fame collided with an emerging battle against addiction. The spotlight didn't calm him, it only intensified the chaos inside. He moved to Nashville in the early 1990s, hungry to prove himself, grinding for years before his breakthrough finally came in 1999 with his self-titled debut album. Overnight, Keith Urban became country music's newest obsession. The tousled hair, the haunting voice, the effortless charm. But behind that rising star was a man on the edge, wrestling demons that no award could silence. By the time he crossed paths with Nicole in 2005, he had already been through rehab more than once, terrified that his vices would one day steal everything he had worked for. On the surface, Nicole and Keith looked like opposites, the elegant Oscar-winning actress and the tattooed country rocker. But beneath the fame, they shared the same aching truth. Both were survivors of their own emotional wreckage. Nicole carried the heartbreak of a family lost and the lingering fear of betrayal. Keith bore the weight of addiction and the constant pull between success and self-destruction. When their worlds finally collided, it felt almost fated. Nicole, freshly divorced and newly crowned with an Oscar award for The Hours, was at the peak of her career, but emotionally adrift, longing for a steady love that fame had never offered her. Keith, meanwhile, was rising fast, but burning out even faster, trapped in an industry that rewarded image more than authenticity. He needed something, or someone real. For Nicole, Keith's vulnerability was magnetic. For Keith, her grace felt like salvation. They saw in each other what they lacked. She offered stability, he offered passion. Together, they believed they could heal what was broken. But even in those early days, there were hints of the storm to come. Her need for order clashed with his unpredictability. Her craving for emotional security met his restless, addictive nature. Their love promised redemption, but it also carried the weight of two people trying to save themselves from themselves. For Nicole, loving another celebrity came with risks she knew too well. Yet with Keith, she was willing to take that chance, not because he was perfect, but because she hoped this time love might finally be enough. Her marriage to Tom Cruise had shown Nicole Kidman just how merciless fame could be, how the world spotlight could burn instead of shine. But when she met Keith Urban, she saw something different entirely. He wasn't polished or guarded. He was vulnerable, even fragile. And that stirred something deep within her, a fierce instinct to protect, to nurture. To him, Nicole wasn't just a muse, she was a mirror. Through her, he saw both his flaws and his potential. Her discipline reflected his chaos, but her love made him believe he could finally become the man he had always dreamed of being. Both had lived through their share of heartbreaks and reinventions. Their early years had sculpted them into complex, wounded souls, survivors in their own ways. So when fate crossed their paths in 2005, it wasn't just love at first sight. It was a collision, passionate, electric, and unpredictable.
Crossing Paths, a fairy tale with cracks. The world called it destiny when Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban met in 2005. Two Australian superstars, both born the same year, both at turning points in their lives. To fans, it looked like a Hollywood fairy tale, two people who had conquered their own worlds finally finding each other. But beneath that glossy surface was something far more human. Two broken hearts clinging to the hope that love might heal what life had damaged. Their story began at the G'day USA Gala in Los Angeles, a celebration of Australians making waves in Hollywood. Nicole, freshly emerging from the storm of her divorce with Tom Cruise, had reclaimed her power. She was glowing, an Oscar-winning actress who had risen from the ashes of heartbreak. Keith, meanwhile, was the rising Nashville star whose music was starting to cross borders and genres. When they were introduced, Nicole later said she didn't think he was interested. He was courteous, but distant, almost shy. They exchanged numbers, but weeks turned into months, and he never called. Nicole, who'd spent her life surrounded by confident men who always made the first move, quietly assumed that was the end of it. But then, months later, Keith finally reached out, and that one call changed everything. From that moment, their connection moved at lightning speed. By May, paparazzi were catching glimpses of them together, and by year-end, Nicole was describing him as the man who had swept her off her feet. To her, Keith was everything her past love had not been: spontaneous, passionate, imperfect, and real. After years of living under intense scrutiny, she found freedom in his unpredictability. For Keith, Nicole brought something grounding. She was grace and stability, the calm he'd been chasing all his life. Her presence gave him structure, and for a man who'd long battled inner chaos, that was intoxicating. By November, they were walking red carpets side by side, and suddenly, they weren't just another celebrity couple. They were Australia's golden pair, the country girl and the movie queen who made love look effortless. Then, barely a year after their first meeting, they sealed their story in a way that only Hollywood could dream up. On a candlelit June evening in 2006, Nicole walked down the aisle of Sydney's Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel, draped in a Balenciaga gown and a veil that seemed to float. Keith, with his signature long hair and boyish grin, waited at the altar looking every bit the rock star romantic. The guest list sparkled with celebrities, but the ceremony itself was intimate, emotional, deeply personal. As Nicole walked down the aisle, witnesses said she fought back tears. Later, Keith serenaded her during the reception, his voice trembling with emotion. It was the kind of love story the world wanted to believe in. A second chance for two people who'd known heartbreak all too well. To outsiders, it looked like perfection. Nicole, once trapped in the shadow of control and expectation, had found a man who adored her openly, fiercely, and without restraint. Keith Urban had found what many called redemption. Not in fame or fortune, but in the arms of Nicole Kidman, one of Hollywood's most respected actresses. To the world, it looked like a perfect love story, a fallen country star saved by the grace of a movie queen. But real life, as it always does, had other plans. Just 4 months after their dreamy wedding, the cracks began to show. Keith checked himself into rehab for alcohol abuse, a shocking twist that shattered their newlywed bliss. Nicole hadn't even finished sending out her thank you cards before she found herself in crisis mode. The tabloids swarmed, painting her marriage as a ticking time bomb. For Keith,
The relapse was humiliating. He had promised himself and her that love would keep him grounded, but the past has a way of finding its way back, and his old demons weren't done with him yet. Nicole, ever fiercely private, didn't flinch. Instead of hiding, she stood by him, visiting him in rehab, keeping her silence and refusing to give the press the satisfaction of watching her break. Later, Keith would say she saved his life, but insiders whispered that it was deeper than that. She wasn't just saving him, she was saving herself. After losing her first marriage to Tom Cruise, she had been denied the chance to fix what was broken. Now she was determined to rewrite that story with Keith, to be the healer this time, the protector, the anchor. She believed in second chances, and she believed in him. That loyalty became the core of their marriage, both its strength and its weakness. Despite the rocky start, they managed to rebuild. Keith found his rhythm again, rising to become one of country music's biggest stars, collecting Grammys and touring the world. Nicole, meanwhile, balanced blockbuster hits like Australia with powerful, emotional performances in films like Rabbit Hole. Publicly, they were the picture of devotion. He'd tearfully thank her in acceptance speeches. She'd describe him as the man who brought her back to life. Together, they became Hollywood's unlikely love story, the proof that real love could survive fame. But behind the glowing photos and red carpets, tension simmered. Their careers pulled them in opposite directions, his endless tours, her month-long film shoots abroad. They vowed never to spend more than a few weeks apart, but that promise often fell victim to packed schedules and missed flights. For Nicole, who had already endured the pain of being separated from her children, Isabella and Connor, the distance was unbearable. When she and Keith welcomed their daughters Sunday Rose in 2008 and Faith Margaret in 2010, she poured herself into motherhood, determined not to repeat the past. Keith adored his girls, but balancing fatherhood with life on the road was a constant battle. The couple worked hard to maintain their image, smiling family photos at airports, hand in hand on red carpets, picture-perfect interviews about love and commitment. To outsiders, they were the antidote to Hollywood's cynicism. But behind closed doors, things weren't as polished. Keith's ongoing struggle with sobriety quietly tested their marriage, while Nicole's deep need for stability often came across as control. Friends began to notice. Their warmth in public was real, but their connection was fraying. Still, they clung to the image of a fairy tale couple, pushing forward as if their love story could be held together by willpower alone. For nearly 20 years, they maintained the facade, the reformed bad boy and the patient savior, two souls clinging to the story the world wanted to believe. But love that lives in performance eventually begins to crack. The same passion that brought them together would one day become the force that tore them apart.
Love under pressure. For over a decade, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban looked like the couple who had conquered every storm love could bring. On the outside, they were radiant. Red carpets, heartfelt speeches, and public affection that painted the picture of a marriage that had beaten the odds. But behind that perfect image was a relationship stretched thin by pain, distance, and the weight of expectation. Their love story had begun with passion and hope, but almost immediately life tested it. Rehab only months after their wedding, endless months apart chasing separate careers, and the challenge of raising two children under the world's watchful eyes, the pressure never stopped. Yet for years they held on, convincing both themselves and the world that love was enough. By the mid-2010s, however, the shine had started to fade. Rumors began circulating, whispers of fights over schedules, Keith's nights out, Nicole's intensity. Every time the gossip surfaced, they'd respond with carefully worded interviews, hand in hand, insisting they were stronger than ever. And maybe part of them believed that. But love, no matter how deep, can only hide cracks for so long. close friends noticed a change. Nicole, always composed and disciplined, seemed emotionally drained, worn out from trying to hold her family together. She admired Keith's talent, but worried about his stability. He, on the other hand, grew tired of feeling like the one who always needed saving. He didn't want to be her project. He wanted to be her partner. It was their differences that made them magnetic, and those same differences that slowly pulled them apart. Nicole's strength that once grounded him began to feel overbearing. Keith's vulnerability that once softened her heart began to feel like a burden. Their marriage became a cycle of saving and resisting, of passion followed by exhaustion. Still, they kept the fairy tale alive for the cameras. To their fans, they weren't just a couple. They were proof that true love could survive fame, addiction, and distance. But behind the carefully curated smiles was a truth neither of them wanted to face. Maintaining that image had become a full-time job. And that job was slowly breaking them. Even their parenting styles exposed the growing distance. Nicole, shaped by her own fractured family history, valued order and protection. She wanted stability for her daughters above all else. Keith preferred warmth and freedom, the dad who turned rules into jokes and moments into laughter. Both loved deeply, but their approaches clashed quietly and constantly. Nicole reportedly felt unsupported. Keith felt judged. Those weren't the dramatic arguments tabloids loved to print. They were small, weary battles that quietly drained love from the inside out. By the time the 2020s arrived, the illusion was starting to slip. Magazines hinted at trouble, stories surfaced about time apart and old habits resurfacing. Each time they would appear together soon after, a united front, smiling, touching, proving the headlines wrong. Nicole would calmly tell interviewers, "We've never been stronger," and Keith would nod, praising her devotion. But away from the lights, it was different. Keith was still fighting to stay grounded. Though he never fell as hard as he had before, Nicole's fear of relapse never really faded. She watched him closely, maybe too closely. To her, it was love. To him, it felt like a cage. He wanted trust, she wanted peace of mind. Nicole loved him deeply, but she was tired of being the steady one, the caretaker, the protector. She wanted partnership, not survival. Keith wanted freedom, not supervision. Both wanted love, but they wanted it in ways that no longer aligned. And yet, they performed the fairy tale with grace. On red carpets, Keith would squeeze her hand, lean close, whisper something tender in her ear. Nicole would smile, poised, elegant, but those smiles didn't sparkle the way they used to. To the public, they looked inseparable, but to those who watched closely, the connection looked rehearsed, like two actors reciting lines from a script they no longer believed in. In truth, their story wasn't one of sudden heartbreak or betrayal. It was the slow fading of a once blazing love, worn down by responsibility, distance, and the impossible pressure to live up to an image that no longer felt real. Because sometimes, love doesn't end with fireworks. Sometimes, it simply runs out of air.
By the time the cracks in Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's marriage began to show, they were no longer the couple the world thought they were. Behind the smiles and red carpet appearances, there was tension, subtle, growing, and deeply human. Nicole, according to those close to her, had grown weary of being the emotional backbone of the relationship. She was tired of always being the strong one, his wife, his support system, and at times his rescuer. Keith, on the other hand, bristled under what he saw as her constant control, her ability to plan, manage, and perfect everything from their children's routines to their public image. Friends described their relationship as a delicate balancing act, one where love often collided with opposing needs. Keith longed for freedom and spontaneity, while Nicole craved stability and peace. He wanted to feel alive, she wanted to feel safe. Neither was wrong, but they were rarely in rhythm. By 2023 and 2024, the cracks became impossible to ignore. Entertainment outlets began whispering that the golden couple was quietly living apart. Paparazzi photos told their own story.
Nicole attending premieres alone, Keith performing on tour without his wedding ring. When asked about each other in interviews, both smiled politely but said little. The warmth that once defined them now felt practiced, distant. Still, they clung to the image of unity. Nicole often remarked that marriage takes work, a statement that now sounded less romantic and more revealing. Keith echoed her sentiment in his own way, calling her his everything, though the words carried a rehearsed weight, as if spoken more from habit than conviction. Every love story reaches a breaking point, and theirs came quietly in the summer of 2025. There was no explosive fight, no tabloid scandal, just the slow realization that they had grown into different people. Nicole withdrew into family life, spending more time with her daughters and less in the spotlight. Keith buried himself in music, performing with an intensity that felt almost like confession. Insiders say the decision to separate came not from anger, but exhaustion. After years of trying to hold everything together, Nicole accepted what she could no longer deny. She couldn't save both the marriage and herself. For nearly 2 decades, she had been the glue, the planner, the caregiver, the emotional anchor through Keith's battles with addiction and the pressures of fame. But even the strongest anchors eventually break loose. So, in September 2025, Nicole Kidman filed for divorce in Davidson County, Tennessee. The filing was simple, irreconcilable differences, but the meaning behind those words was anything but. It marked the end of one of Hollywood's longest-running love stories, a union built on passion, redemption, and resilience. The paperwork revealed a quiet finality. Nicole requested primary residential custody of their daughters, Sunday and Faith, while agreeing to share major decisions with Keith. Both waived spousal and child support, suggesting that their financial independence had long been established. For Nicole, it was a dignified exit, a woman choosing peace over performance. But Keith's reaction spoke volumes. Days after the divorce became public, fans noticed his wedding ring was gone. Then, during his Pennsylvania concert, he turned what should have been a routine stop on his High and Alive world tour into something raw and deeply personal. As he performed, he subtly changed the lyrics to 2 of his most famous songs, turning them into emotional confessions of loss, heartbreak, and self-reflection. It was as if he was telling the world what the court documents couldn't, that even after all the years, the love, and the effort, something precious had slipped away. What began as one of Hollywood's most inspiring romances had ended not in scandal, but in silence. A quiet, painful surrender to time, change, and the truth that even the strongest love sometimes can't survive the weight of its own history. He walked onto the stage that night bare-handed. No wedding band, no illusion left to uphold. It was a quiet yet powerful statement, and the crowd noticed. From the first note, his performance teetered between anger, heartbreak, and something hauntingly nostalgic, as if he was wrestling with the ghosts of a love story that had already burned out. But the real shock came when he reached his 2004 breakup anthem, "You'll Think of Me." The crowd held their breath as he changed the original lyric, "Take your space and take your reasons," into a sharp, bitter jab at "Take your unreasonable reasons." It was impossible to miss the venom in his voice. Fans instantly knew this wasn't just a lyric change, it was a message. A message many believed was aimed straight at Nicole Kidman and their unraveling marriage. That emotional outburst stood in striking contrast to what came next. During Heart Like a Hometown, photos of him with Nicole and their 2 teenage daughters flashed across the screen behind him. The moment felt conflicted, like he couldn't decide whether to mourn or move on. And, noticeably, one song was missing. The Fighter, his 2016 hit, famously inspired by his love for Nicole. It had always been their song. Its absence said everything, his words didn't.
Between sets, Keith shared stories about his childhood, how his parents encouraged him to chase music instead of a conventional life. It felt like he was trying to remind himself and the audience of the man he was before fame, before love, before heartbreak. But there was another shadow hanging over the night. Maggie Baugh, the young guitarist who had recently been linked to him. She wasn't there, but her absence was deafening. Viral clips of their earlier duets, complete with suspiciously romantic glances and altered lyrics, had already set the internet on fire. And now, with her missing and his set list dramatically rewritten, speculation only grew louder. By the end of the concert, it was clear this was no ordinary show. It was a statement, a cry, maybe even a confession. The next morning, tabloids went wild. Headlines screamed about Nicole finally walking away, painting her as the woman who'd given everything and received heartbreak in return. Keith, meanwhile, was cast as the tortured soul, a man consumed by his own demons. Fans divided instantly, combing through every lyric, every look, every gesture for hidden meaning. Nicole, who had quietly filed for divorce, hoping for privacy, suddenly found herself back under a blinding spotlight. She didn't respond with words, but with silence, grace, and calculated composure. Weeks later, at a film festival appearance, she too stepped out without her wedding ring. Her smile remained, but her eyes told a different story, a deep, lingering sorrow. At the center of their split was one thing: family. For Nicole, losing daily contact with Isabella and Connor during her marriage to Tom Cruise was a pain that never healed. She was determined not to lose her younger daughters, Sunday and Faith, the same way. The divorce filings reflected that determination. Nicole would be the girls' primary caregiver, giving them the stability she once longed for. Keith reportedly agreed without a fight. Those close to him say it wasn't a matter of love. He adores his daughters. It was a matter of practicality. His life on the road simply couldn't offer the stability they needed. One insider put it plainly: Keith didn't give up custody because he doesn't care. He did it because he knows the girls deserve consistency. In the weeks that followed, Nicole found refuge in her daughters and her work. Paparazzi spotted her in Nashville, walking hand in hand with Sunday and Faith. Her posture was calm, but protective, a mother guarding her peace after years of turbulence. Her focus now is survival, her children, her career, and her healing. Keith, meanwhile, has turned his pain into performance. His concerts have become emotional spectacles, part confession, part therapy. Fans describe him breaking down mid-song, his tears blurring the line between artist and man. It's raw, it's real, and it's heartbreaking. In a way, both of them are telling their stories in the only ways they know how. Nicole through silence and strength, Keith through song and sorrow. Their love story, once celebrated as a perfect Hollywood fairy tale, now reads more like a ballad of loss and self-discovery. But perhaps that's the truth about love. It doesn't always end neatly. Sometimes it burns bright, teaches you something, and leaves you standing in the ashes, stronger but scarred. What do you think about their split? Was it inevitable, or could love have survived the storm? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you never miss the next story behind the stars.